Young Adult is my favorite feel-bad movie of all time. It has all the right ingredients. A protagonist who is a villain, narcissism, delusion and denial, depression and avoidance with self-medication, and a little bit of autobiographical self-reflection as a bonus. Mavis Gary is a fucking masterclass on how to fuck up your life and revel in the wreckage without any redemption. I wish more attention were given to art like this because we get plenty of discourse around the representation of women as action stars and franchise headliners, but nothing about a representation of one of the most common demographics in the world, assholes. Not just any asshole, but a realistic one, a true dirtbag. They don't bully for sport or say catty things when no one else is listening, or wait for an audience of adulating admirers to engage in nuclear levels of bitchery. This type of asshole is mad about a very specific thing in their life that they can't believe everyone else isn't mad about. They think they're doing a really good job hiding all the resentment and bitterness with the facade of having it together. They never fool anyone, but they go with a confidence that isn't earned, but something they have been faking for so long that it starts to feel natural. Mavis as a character is a litmus test for anyone struggling to understand where that nagging sense of questioning your own happiness comes from. You either realize that happiness isn't just a binary choice and that there is emotional work to be done for it, or you're Mavis. She's presented with the experience of a multitude of emotions and refuses to confront them, and the result is a spectacular emotional Hindenburg that you are glued to. She is BoJack Horseman, a modicum of fame that is being held on to desperately because they have no other sense of identity. There's a deep sense of abandonment and resentment from life passing them by, and of course, raging alcoholism gone unchecked. The autobiographical element comes from writer Diablo Cody, who won an Oscar for original screenplay for her debut film as a writer, Juno, and then happened to suffer a pretty big financial setback with the underperformance of Jennifer's Body. Cody seemed to understand that her writing in particular got scrutinized with a specific lens because she was writing about teenage characters, specifically teenage girls, and most of the criticism surrounding her writing was about her dialogue and not about character development or story. It's a difficult thing to write about kids and teenagers, especially because while some issues are always around and universal and evergreen, there are new challenges for adolescents to have to deal with because of changes in technology, societal expectations, and the general priorities of the collective community they are in. Cody faced a lot of mockery around how the dialogue for her main character seemed forced to try and come off as clever, or wanting to start a new linguistic trend. Her reaction to this criticism, coupled with her ambitions about getting a Sweet Valley High project off the ground, seems to have culminated in the script for Young Adult. Understanding the background adds some color, but it's not the meat and potatoes of my enjoyment of this movie. You can go in not knowing anything about Diablo or her life, but this movie is a Red Lobster buffet where there is something for everyone, and it is delicious, protracted cringe instead of cheap shellfish. The very simple plot of Young Adults is that Mavis, under the pretense of buying property, comes back to her hometown of Mercury, Minnesota to reconnect with Buddy Slade, her high school boyfriend. She is fully aware that he is a new parent and happily married to his wife, Beth. She goes into this harebrained scheme of stealing back Buddy with the foolhardy naivete of a teenager in love. She explains away her lack of rationality with her conviction that Buddy must be feeling the same sense of confinement and morose dejection because he's reached an adult milestone of having a kid. Mavis herself is dealing with the ramifications of a divorce and finding her identity without her husband and the life they had together. She shares a part of this harebrained scheme with Matt Freehoff, someone else who went to high school with Mavis and Buddy, who immediately calls this out as a bad idea. Undeterred, Mavis stumbles towards her delusional idea of a happy ending with all the main character energy a barely functional alcoholic can muster. What I think makes Young Adult and its protagonist so compelling is that the internal logic of the character feels pretty airtight. Every shitty thing Mavis does is not only explained away in her worldview, but it is also clearly set up within the cinematic language of the storytelling. You're not surprised by anything she does, and yet the performances and the writing make this train wreck so gripping. You come away feeling exhausted, like you've just dealt with being physically around Mavis herself for the last 90 minutes. Mavis is deeply unhappy, and not even uniquely so. There's this kaleidoscope of sadness in Mavis's misery where you see new and different patterns every time you examine it. Mavis is a divorced ghostwriter, working on the last book of the Waverly Prep series, a project she keeps putting off because she clearly hasn't come to terms with what the end of the series actually emotionally means for her. She lives in Minneapolis in a pretty nondescript high-rise apartment, and I get the distinct feeling that she is a fucking terrible neighbor. There's so much cinematic shorthand about Mavis as a person in the first few minutes of meeting her. She's definitely a product of Gen X. There's an aversion to sincerity because the 90s overdosed on irony that comes headlong into a clash with the aggressive niceness of the small Minnesota town she grew up in. She got the birth announcement of her ex's child via an email blast because Gen X was not using Facebook in 2010. She hyphenated her name with her ex-husband's, and she stuck to it professionally, but switches between Mavis Gary and Mavis Gary Crane, depending on who she's talking to. Her apartment looks like the tumultuous chaos of a newly minted college graduate enjoying their single life in the city, living it up with newfound economic freedom from their job that she brags about to her friends but couldn't give a shit about in reality. Mavis, however, is not 22. She's 37. A time in your life when you're expected to have most of it together. She works hard to connect to youth culture, something that probably feels necessary for a writer for young adult books, but she doesn't switch it off when she's not writing. You can tell she only has a dog because she wanted something to consume her time after the divorce, and getting a cat would make her seem lonely. If she isn't putting together her manuscript, she's busy distracting herself with online shopping and dating because the emptiness needs to be filled with things constantly. Mavis's fashion and appearance exhibits her psychology pretty clearly. She's rigorously put together when going out, dressed in shades of black, white, and gray. There are no splashes of color to show her mood or any other sentiment other than pragmatic detachment. She's on trend with the 2010s fashion trends of the soft grunge aesthetics with her leather and studs and flannel. She's always looking immaculate when she's going outside, and she puts a lot of effort into her presentation, where there's nothing that gives away any idea that she may not be in control of her own life. Outside of that, though, she's disheveled and slovenly when she's at home because no one is looking, so why put on a show? She's always got her Hello Kitty t-shirt on when she's not dressed up because she's hip with the kids. She consumes Diet Coke and alcohol habitually, almost without any thought put into it, like it's involuntary and not something she's relishing or even present mentally when experiencing. Mavis is definitely a consumer. Her professional life is spent thinking about appealing to as many people as possible, and she spends her time with her TV set to reality programming while only half engaged. And she's always placed and framed next to some sort of brand or product that is created for mass consumption. She doesn't give any thought to whether she actually gets any pleasure out of anything. There's almost a mechanical predictability in her life, even when it has the appearance of chaos on the surface. Juxtaposed with this is her need to be seen as an individual. Mavis definitely employs the phrase basic bitch while she's shopping at Forever 21 and H&M and getting her coffee from Starbucks and her dinner from McDonald's and KFC. She won't even engage with the idea that she has a lot in common with the people around her, especially the ones that she's distanced herself from in her hometown. It feels like a deeply personal insult to Mavis to be called ordinary or accessible. She appears to both hate herself and be in love with herself at the same time. Mavis is clearly afraid to be alone and is willing to put up with any company so long as she's not the only one talking because she loves having something to react to. She gets an inkling of her depression and her emptiness, but runs away from it the minute it becomes palpable in her physical presence. She numbs that pain with alcohol and endures the repercussions of that addiction with a chagrined sense of defeat. I love the choice to make Mavis truly not care about appearing to be nice or approachable unless it serves her. She carries a visible sense of emptiness around her everywhere she goes, and she seems annoyed when people are nice to her in an attempt to get her to be nice back. She doesn't want to be fixed even if she admitted she was broken. I also really love that she is a hack writer. Her writing the novel as a voiceover serves the purpose of letting us know what's on Mavis's mind, mostly herself. Her heroine, Kendall Strickland, is so OP, she would make Mary Sue blush. This is fan fiction level of writing. The delusions of grandeur and false humility are so overpowering, you are horrified and then tickled pink, and then you come back around to just being really sad. Her detachment and petulance shines through in her writing, and it is a joy drenched with exquisite cringe to hear Mavis speak her psychotic monologues of narration with the complete conviction that only a true main character could have. It's no surprise this series is ending. It sounds fucking terrible. Mavis's misery is an ever-present, ominous specter. There's always an undercurrent of rage and resentment felt within every disdainful glance. The air around her is thick with bitterness and malcontent, never spoken but always felt. You can see that there's a disappointment and antipathy in how Mavis views her present circumstances. She feels like she deserves better, but she can't articulate why or work towards achieving what she thinks is owed. Adulthood has let her down badly because she was finally fully in control of her life, and she hates the fact that there is no one else to blame other than her because it would be so much easier if it were someone else's fault. One of the most interesting things about Mavis to me is how much she hates her hometown. Don't get me wrong, it's not uncommon to do that, nor is it an inherently good or bad thing. I'm actually a big fan of hater culture and being a hater. I'll even allow passive hating, but I think you can do more. No, the interesting part is that Mavis wasn't the school loser. She was actually the head bitch in charge in high school. She was attractive and popular and had a jock boyfriend, the trifecta of womanhood. Everyone knows who she was and remembers her from their high school days. She was worshipped by the wannabes and the underlings, and she actually had a really good time in high school. Psychotic, I know. She looks back at it pretty fondly, and she doesn't seem to wish that anything had gone different while she was in high school. But she still hates her hometown of Mercury, Minnesota. She looks upon it with visible disgust and is always offended at the idea of someone else thinking she would move back there. She's exactly the type of person who you would think would look forward to the tedium of high school reunions and alumni fundraisers. It's such an interesting contradiction because it stands out from the whole premise of Arrested Development.
I think the stupidest things are funny.
Yeah, that's a cultural problem, is what it is. You know, your average American man is in a perpetual state of adolescence. Arrested Development.
Hey, that's the name of the show.
The whole point of coming back to this place she hates, of course, is Buddy, or the idea of a renewing power of love that Buddy represents. Mavis paints this return as a huge sacrifice, an act of selfless bravery where she's here to rescue him because she always believed that they would find their way back to each other. Her personality has been so scabbed over from her acrid worldview, she doesn't know how to behave around him. So she falls back to sweet and demure. It's basically a pastiche of the nice girl from a small town charm that she knows to be desirable but can't fully embody. Her ridiculous pursuit of Buddy is like if someone with a theoretical idea of romance, like say a young adult novelist, designed a seduction. Mavis's possibility of being a neurodivergent is briefly hinted at but never explicitly talked about. But I think her career as a novelist and her ego is what gets in the way of her realizing that she's got no idea when it comes to love and relationships as an adult. Her attempts are pathetic and reek of unresolved insecurities, and a sense of righteous disapproval permeates all her interactions with Buddy's wife, Beth. She sees herself as a savior for Buddy because she is convinced that he doesn't want to be where he is at right now, and that's because she wouldn't want to be there. She isn't even aware that she's embarrassing herself because she's so convinced that she's the hero of her own story, which means that she will be rewarded with her prince at the end. Mavis simpers and smiles and laughs at the incredibly banal exchanges she has with Buddy. She has objectified him to a point of farce. He's not even a person anymore, but an idea, a means to an end. She doesn't even stop to think that she is sacrificing her self-respect because she thinks what she's doing is actually valiant and noble. Mavis has idealized this one-sided relationship so much in her head that she paints the situation as finally pursuing what makes her happy and thinking about herself for a change, instead of seeing that she is replacing one dependency for another. There is no apparent reason for the attraction between them anymore. Buddy is harmless flawlessly unremarkable, but he is affable and friendly and seems like a nice guy. Mavis doesn't seem to be herself around him, and Buddy is clearly a gentler and kinder person than she is. However, he doesn't seem to influence her to be a better version of herself or point out any contradictions within her personality. He's always looking to avoid conflict, and Mavis seems to thrive on it. No, the attraction clearly comes from what's beneath the surface. He reminds her of the times where she felt like she was actually living up to her potential and felt happy and fulfilled. She wants to feel that same happiness now, but through a sense of normalcy and a contentment with domesticity, which she thinks she can just absorb through Buddy. This relationship is directly contrasted with her interactions with Matt. Despite clearly not wanting to, Mavis finds a kinship in him. When they were in high school together, Matt got assaulted by some losers in the woods behind the school because they thought he was gay. Matt, however, was not gay, and he is clearly upset that the gravity of the violence he experienced was minimized once it wasn't designated as an actual hate crime. He seems to share the same resentment that Mavis has of life not turning out better because, in his case, his choices were taken from him. They both hate Mercury for the same reasons. It is a constant reminder of the stagnation in their lives, and it represents this oppressive obligation to put on a face of happiness and perky smile so that others don't feel uncomfortable around them. The only difference is that Mavis got to leave, and Matt didn't when he wanted to. Despite all of this, he's doing fine. He's made peace with his choices. He has a home distillery where he makes small batch whiskey, and he collects action figures. He works at the nondescript sports bar and grill for bookkeeping, but he really doesn't give a shit about his job because he doesn't let his occupation define his life. In his own way, he has found contentment and a sense of belonging without worrying about having to really fit in. He seems to have mostly come to terms with his disability and doesn't feel the need to put on a brave face to soothe the anxiety of everyone else who feel guilt and shame of allowing something terrible like that to happen to someone else. Matt appears to be the only one not treating Mavis with kid gloves. He is not intimidated by her, even though they were not friends or even friendly in high school. Mavis gets a sense of freedom in the way she can interact with Matt without having to hide her intentions and desires and who she truly is beneath a facade of niceness that she finds hard to maintain for a long time. Matt presents an uncomfortable truth of happiness being a choice, that misery is not inevitable or inescapable, but happiness isn't the complete absence of negative emotions. He's okay being alone, and that confuses and intrigues Mavis. She seems to very much resent that he isn't blindly loyal to her, and even deflects her own issues with a classic case of projection by telling Matt to move on from the past. That's rich coming from her. Mavis being back in Mercury helps her finally piece together that something has felt wrong inside her all along. A prescribed idea of normalcy is what she always aspired to because that's how she was raised. So she thinks that moving towards that while adding her own brand of panache will make her happy. From ignoring her alcoholism to excusing away her painfully unfunny barbs with polite smiles and diplomatic comments, everyone in Mercury seems to be making an effort to keep Mavis from feeling the cracks in her veneer. Things finally culminate at her breaking point, and this is where she comes to a terrible, bilious realization. She has been pitied and coddled and indulged because her fragility is apparent to everyone but herself. No one takes any part of her seriously, her pain or her anger, but they don't want to be held responsible for what she does to herself. She's simply being tolerated because she is a temporary nuisance, one that they have to collectively just wait out. Mercury is a placeholder. It's a metaphor for the place in your life that you're looking around and realize nothing is where you want it to be. It's the place that houses your lowest lows and what you imagined would be your highest high. It is a place where you are trapped within a prison of your own demons, unable to change because you were never prepared to confront the uncomfortable. Mavis realizes she feels that happiness comes easily to others, and she used to pity them for it because it took very little to make other people feel happy. Now she realizes that she might be envious of them, and this enrages her to the point of dissolution. Mavis despises the town for not seeing what it lacks and the pretense that it has become something better. She hates that they would rather pretend nothing is wrong because it's harder to work on admitting something is wrong and even harder to fix it. Basically, she hates Mercury for being her. There's a lot to admire about the craft of filmmaking in young adult. The set design, costuming, even the music, they all coalesce perfectly to create the realistic fairy tale that goes predictably wrong because the rules of reality still apply. The best part of young adult, however, is that at no point in the movie, even at Mavis's lowest, are we as an audience asked to excuse her or forgive her. Mavis has exploded her life and basically has nothing to look forward to in the future. Mavis doesn't want to be an anti-hero or a villain, but she fits that role so well because she wants to be noticed. She wants to feel a release from the anger, from being ignored by life. There is no moment of catharsis where the viewer goes, good for her. Her choices mean that she has ended up right where she started, except this time there is a slight chance that she is aware of why she is there, but it's not for sure. She's convinced that her best is behind her and that she has nothing left to offer. Writers supposedly hate cliches, and she is the cliche of the popular girl that peaked in high school. Mavis remains craving a reminder of the times where it seemed like anything was possible because the future hadn't happened yet, and all she had was the adulation and admiration of the people around her. Even the simplest act of bolstering her ego is enough to completely undo any amount of reflection that she may have done upon wanting to change and grow. It's natural for a sense of self-preservation to kick in when you're feeling sad or low. But Mavis is a reminder that if you run up an emotional debt by running away from confronting your emotions, life will still come to collect. It can be important to stew uncomfortably in that sadness because it's the only opportunity you'll get to ask what you're actually really feeling sad about and process that. It's important to sit and grieve for the things we wanted but couldn't get or didn't want and are stuck dealing with. It's important to know that it's okay to feel bad because none of this shit will ever pass until you feel it. The only way forward is through.